All right, welcome back everyone to the GDFL podcast hosted by yours truly, the Commissioner Andrew Korn. This week, my guest is our 2024 league champion, none other than himself, Levi Hubbard. Welcome back to the show, Levi.
Hey guys, pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so just a quick recap of our matchups from this past week. So, as we mentioned leading on to the show, the Holsteins have won the GDFL championship, defeating the Stink Kings by a score of 137 to 100. And then the other one of note is Mark finished third, beating Ryan 160.4 to 135.5. So Mark takes home the third place prize. I took home second, and Levi, you took home first. So next slide, I'm going to break down both of our rosters, our lineups from this past week, and then we'll go from there to discuss. So first, I have mine up on here. Uh, Looking at my lineup, there is a lot of red on this screen, and I think a lot of that is because, well, all of those players performed under their projections. The only players that exceeded projections on my team this week were Mike Evans and George Kittle. There's really only one lineup decision I was pondering, which was Devontae Smith versus Jerome Ford. I clearly made a horrible decision as Devontae Smith scored 27 and Jerome Ford scored two. He got injured like pretty early in the second quarter of that game. And that kind of, my chances were already kind of dead from the onset, apparently, with how my roster performed. That was one lineup decision where last week in the semis, Jerome Ford outscored Devontae Smith. Last year in the finals, Jerome Ford outscored Devontae Smith, and that was the lineup decision I was considering. So because it happened twice, I decided I wasn't going to make that third lineup decision incorrectly. I did. Such is life, though. It happens. Really, the one that stands out to me is Aaron Rodgers putting up .48. Fuck Aaron Rodgers is really all I have to say about that. I really had no choice but to start him, I felt like. I mean, the Bills defense had been shredded by quarterbacks the last like several weeks now. I felt fine starting him. Apparently, I picked up Tyler Huntley off waivers Sunday morning, and apparently that would have been the better start. And if I would have started both him and Devontae Smith, would have won. Hindsight's always 2020, though. That wasn't anything I was giving any consideration. Really, the only one I was giving consideration was Devontae Smith or Jerome Ford. But yeah, it's hard to win when pretty much your entire starting lineup puts up less than 10 points.
Yeah, and not that anyone needs any more reason to hate Aaron Rodgers, but if I were you, I would hate his guts. And the Jets, it's not just that he performed poorly, it's that he didn't get Brees Hall the ball. I think it looks like he threw it to him once. That's just bullshit. That's not using Brees Hall effectively.
No, Aaron Rodgers, I think I saw on Twitter that Aaron Rodgers' QB rating this past week was the lowest for any quarterback in the last 4 years. So
Mm.
Aaron Rodgers straight up had one of the worst starts, probably the worst of his career. And yeah, that affected Brees Hall too because he had no opportunities to score just because of like how pitiful Aaron Rodgers was. So yeah, I'm gonna reiterate. I've texted a few people this, but fuck Aaron Rodgers. Don't think he's ever gonna crack my lineup ever again. Yeah, moving on to the Holsteins. So, Levi, you want to talk us through any lineup decisions that you had to make, any last second subs, just anything you want to talk about?
Yeah. So Bo Nix has just been the steady, trustworthy guy. I had a big sit down meeting with my dad and brother the Saturday morning to discuss AR, take the risk of rolling with AR and him potentially being out, or just play Drake May. They helped me make the right decision and play Drake May. And then otherwise, Henry was an egg, but I was not going to start Chig over Henry. J.K. Dobbins felt like a really risky play. Um, but it worked out, especially coming off IR. But once I realized Gus wasn't going to play, that was you just shoot for upside. So I went with that. Cook did Cook things. White disappointed. Mixon disappointed. Najee did fine. Honestly, a lot of that was garbage points. I watched that game pretty close. And then, of course, T. Higgins, ironically enough, I put $2 on T. Higgins scoring 3 touchdowns, and I won $300 on that too. So that was just as good as it gets for me. But the crowning achievement in all this for me is Jonathan Taylor. I felt pretty risky about moving AJ Brown to get him in the first place, but this week and last week he won me a title, so no regrets whatsoever. Jonathan Taylor is that's my baby boy right there.
Hmm. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor the last 3 weeks, even like going back to the first week of the playoffs, I think he had over 20 points each week of the playoffs. And then T. Higgins was no slouch either. Like both of those two were really the stars of your playoff run. Like I think T. Higgins had a really good play. I'd have to double check the exact numbers, but I remember when I looked at both, like really both of them were the like stars of your fantasy championship. Yeah, I remember I was a little skeptical of the Jonathan Taylor trade at first from a dynasty perspective, but I mean he clearly showed out these last 3 weeks, and all that matters is winning a title, and he got you that title. And then yeah, T. Higgins watching that game, like after he scored his second touchdown, I was like, heart sank a little. Watching that third one, it was just like putting a knife into it. It was tough to watch. So a little bit of context for some of the viewers back home. Levi and I had a bit of a side bet this week where the loser has to buy the winner a jersey of whoever the highest scoring player is on the championship team. So this morning I ordered Levi a T. Higgins jersey. So it'll be coming to him sometime in the next couple months. I ordered from DH Gate. Sometimes those jerseys come in 2 weeks, sometimes it's 2 months. Don't really know when it'll happen, but it's something I started doing for myself a few years ago. And started in 2020 when I won two fantasy championships that year, and I bought a Kamara and Kittle jersey for myself. And that's something I've been kind of like a tradition I'm going to do for myself is like whenever I buy a new jersey, it's going to be either like a key contributor or the highest scorer of my fantasy matchup. And so I wanted to make that side bet with Levi. It was jerseys are only like $20 from DH Gate, so it's not like I'm breaking the bank or anything. But yeah, Levi's going to be a proud owner of a T. Higgins jersey whenever it comes in the mail. And then taking a look at the draft order, so that is now final. So Trevor's locked up the 101. We've known that for weeks. Really, the big difference here at the bottom is Ryan has 9 and 10, and then that affects the subsequent rounds. Sokol's going to have the 11th overall pick, and then Trevor's got the 12th overall pick. So, mentioned and reiterated several times, this draft is going to run through 4 teams, where it's Trevor, Sokol, Beans, and Ryan for now. There still could be a bunch of offseason trades. Who knows how many of these picks are actually made by these teams? But yeah, draft order is finished. The full draft order will be unveiled in the newsletter whenever I drop that. And then Levi and I are just going to do a bit of a end of season recap. I don't really have like too much in terms of structure just because Levi and I kind of decided to do this about an hour ago. So I pulled the standings again. So I guess my first question for you, Levi, was looking at the standings, like what teams were most surprising to you, both like positively and negatively?
So I think Beans has a lot to look forward to going into next season, and I don't really understand why because I look at his roster and don't think too highly of it. But with the picks he has and how close he did come, I'm having a hard time already ruling him out for next season. Uh, Shrew, I guess he did disappoint this season for what I expected for him, but that's another team I would think is probably feeling pretty good going into next season. Of course, this is assuming rosters hold as is. Um, and then, of course, Ryan is the low hanging fruit of yes, he did better than expected. Um, as did I. That's also low hanging fruit. Teams that disappointed, though, would have been like, honestly, Chaz probably should have had a deeper run. I expected him to. Um, and then Jake, I never know what to make of Jake's team. But for him to not make playoffs, Jake never plays to rebuild. So those would probably be the two standouts. Sokol maybe too, but Sokol did a really good job at the end of the season. So really Beans is the one that I want to highlight.
Yeah, I want to highlight Beans this season as well. His roster going into the year was nothing I thought was too crazy, but McLaurin had a breakout year. Sutton had a great year. Bijan proved he was the right choice at 101 last year all along. Chase Brown and Josh Downs both had breakouts this year too. Like really, Beans' success I think came on the breakout of a lot of players. Like the big thing for Beans is he does not have a QB2, and if the way Sam Darnold has played this year, JJ McCarthy is no lock to start next year at all. In fact, I would probably, if I were a betting man, Would bet the Vikings at the very least franchise tag Darnold for next year, if not signing him to an extension outright. Truthfully, we don't know what they're going to do. I think it's really hard to move on from him after a 14-2 season. I think Beans is, I mean, I think with the 104 and 105, there's a chance he could get a quarterback there. He might need to use those picks to maneuver up, though, if he wants a rookie, or maybe he uses it to trade for more of an established vet. But yeah, Beans is a team to look out for. Shrewd, I think, definitely underachieved a little bit. Some of it is he lost a lot of really close matchups, and just winning one or two of them would have put him into the playoff picture. He was fourth in scoring, so it's not like his team was like that disappointing per se. It just like should have been a little bit better. I think, yeah, and on the same token, Ryan overachieved a little bit with again, he won some close matchups. Um, Not a ton there that I haven't like went deeper on already. Although I do think it's funny. I think Ryan's finished fourth now, all 3 years of the league so far. Uh, has lost the third place, has lost both the semifinals and the third place game each of the last 3 years. So Ryan has just narrowly missed out on at least earning back his buy-in the last couple of years. It is what it is. It's the nature of the game we play. Um, Yeah, the only other real like true disappointment for me was Sokol's team got off to a pretty slow start, and then that led to his midseason sell-off. I mean, I thought it was a great sell-off for him, though, as you mentioned. I Disappointing season, but I think he'd made the smart but difficult choice to sell and try and retool for next year in the future. And then a quick breakdown of the playoffs. Just a reminder for everyone: Ryan beat Chaz in the first round, and then Levi beat Stun. In the second round, Levi beat Mark, and then I beat Ryan. And in the finals, Levi knocked me off. What's always fun to think about is if Stun just would have started Cooper Rush, Mark would have been in this podcast with me today talking about the end of the season recap. But here you are today, Levi. So it's just always fun to think again what one little lineup decision could have made for some teams.
So this is your second year making it to the finals in a row, right?
Yep, yeah, I've lost in the
Okay.
finals the last 2 years now.
Who Logan beat year one?
Jake.
Ah, okay.
Yep. Yeah, that Jake's final was run in year one. I was like looking at it this morning, or maybe it was last night, and I want to say he scored like 110, like 98 and 98 in those three matchups. Like it's kind of the most improbable run to the finals I think we'll ever see, where he just had the perfect storm of having his matchups hit and his opponent's teams just being bad. Um,
Mhm.
like your team had great weeks throughout the playoffs. I guess that first week wasn't particularly strong, but like the last 2 weeks, your team really came on strong. Same thing happened with Logan's team in year one, where like his team in the like 3 weeks of the finals or 3 weeks of the playoffs was at like 140 or more each of those weeks. Now, something I did want to call out was, I mean, you had one win last year, then you had 3 wins year one. You had as many wins in this playoff run as you had almost the last 2 years combined. So Holsteins have come a long, long ways since those early years of the GDFL.
I had to restructure my process, but man often finds his destiny on the path he takes to avoid it.
I couldn't have said it any better myself.
Yeah.
Well, that was beautifully said. And so I have just like some list of some end of season topics I want to go over. So one is just like any key moments from throughout the season that you want to highlight. Then we have trades, strategies, and then some off-season predictions. But yeah, any key moments that you want to highlight?
For me, I would say it was a really tough start to the season. I know it was something like the first 7 games I would have won the median, but I only won like one or two of them. So to get the turnaround going meant a lot. And then the Jacoby Myers miracle, that was the key moment for me. Um, Big trades. The JT for AJ Brown one, the AJ Brown 3 team swap that he ended up going through. I think that'll have pretty big implications in the future. But he's also 28 or 29. I think 28.
I think he's
Um,
27 right now, about to turn 28 next season.
okay. So I think that will have big implications in the future. I'm trying to think of other teams because I could talk about myself all day, but Ryan's rebuild coming to life, I think that's massive. I think that has huge implications for the league. Um, and then, of course, Trevor and Sokol are the two rebuilders that are really worth highlighting for key moments.
hmm Yeah, so at least for like key moments and like big trades, at least for big trades, it's really hard not to talk about my team and your team because we really facilitated probably 90 to 95% of them if we were to look back and do the actual math. That, like for you, I think some, like there's you made a bunch of them and a lot of them were acquiring a player and then flipping them immediately for something else. Two I want to highlight are two you made with Mark that got you T. Higgins and James Cook. Those ended up being huge for you. James Cook had a massive season, and then T. Higgins, I think, was wide receiver three in points per game this year. Maybe even wide receiver two. I'd have to double check. I just remember
Hmm.
Twitter sources sometimes use PPR, so it's kind of hard for me to remember exactly which was which. But yeah, Mark really helped give you a few key players for your playoff run. And then two, I want to highlight for myself, the ones that I think made the biggest impact. I think the Justin Jefferson trade was probably one of the most landscape shaping trades in the league. Really, like it just didn't work out for Sokol. Like Tyreek Hill, Olave, Zach Moss on paper was a pretty good return for Jefferson. Like going into the season, you could kind of like people were under the assumption like Tyreek Hill and Jefferson were probably going to score same amount of points. Olave was viewed around like wide receiver 12. Zach Moss was seen as a starting running back for a good team. Like really, it on paper there was nothing wrong with that end of that deal for Sokol. Like he got a pretty good return for Jefferson. Just yeah, Tua got hurt and that really derailed Tyreek's season. Olave really didn't have a bad of a year as the numbers suggest. He just left games early with injuries a couple times. And then Zach Moss, he just wasn't that good this year. There's really no sugarcoating that one. Um, just kind of is what it is. I gave Ryan back his own first, which I thought it was going to be Ryan was going to tank this year and it was going to end up being a top like 3 to 5 pick. I didn't think his team was going to be truly bad enough to be at the bottom, but ended up being the 109. So it made me feel better. I mean, I'm always a little petty of stuff like that. After I traded Ryan his first back, I was kind of hoping he was going to have a good year just to make it look better on my end for acquiring Jefferson. Um, and so it did to some extent, but yeah, I think that one was probably like the biggest, like truly like landscape altering trade. I've mentioned it before. My trade of Nico Collins in the 112, giving Chaz Baker and Trey McBride was also a pretty big one, and probably one that's it was a huge trade, but also one that ended up being very fair for both sides. I think we're both pretty happy with what the outcome of that one was. Um, Another sneaky one for you, Levi, was Rashad White for Joe Mixon in the 207. Yeah, I said that right. Yeah. Rashad White for Mixon in the 207. Splitting Rashad White into two pieces. I mean, you just got better running back and a pick with it. That ended up being a pretty big one for you as well, in terms of like it was a smaller deal, but like ended up having like pretty big dividends for you at the end.
Yeah, Mixon boomed in a way that I did not expect. So really, the 207 was what I thought I was stealing in that trade at the time.
hmm Yeah, I'm trying to remember if like there's because I was going through like within the last week looking at the list of all like the big trades. I mean, yeah, Ryan's sell off again was pretty landscape altering. He took himself, he was this two seed the first 2 years of the league. He took himself down from that pedestal to try and reshape his roster for 2025 and beyond. Um, and then yeah, really every other trade like was really facilitated through me and you. I guess Stun had a series of pretty good trades too. Getting JSN from you ended up working out really well for him. Jerry Judy had a pretty good season, way better than I think anyone was expecting.
Saquon.
Yeah, Saquon. He had Saquon traded him to you and then reacquired him back. So I think Stun had a pretty good series of trades as well. Um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Or was I blanking? Yeah, just going, slowly seeing how these trades just shape the league going forward. A couple other ones I had in mind relating to the draft was Shrew was deliberating all day that first day of whether to take Caleb Williams or Marvin Harrison. And I mean, at least in year one, I don't really think it would have mattered a ton. I mean, both of them had fine rookie years. Like, there's nothing to like be ashamed of or upset about. Like, they're still rookies. They have plenty of time to develop. It's just funny that like both QB2 and wide receiver two, which would have been yeah, Jane Daniels and Malik Neighbors in the draft, both would have been the better options. Uh, Hindsight's always 2020 though. Like it's really easy to say these things in hindsight, but it's just funny that True was deliberating on that one, and it probably really didn't even mattering a ton. Um,
I would have made the same decision he did.
Oh yeah, I would have taken Caleb at 101 as well. Just like I didn't think he was a generational prospect he was hyped up to be, but I still think he was a very strong 101 for that class and like seen as like the safest prospect in the class. Like whether or not he's good in real life fantasy, just like seemed like everything was aligning for him. Had the great receivers and DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze. Like the supporting cast on paper was there. It just didn't work out quite like that for Caleb. I'm not too upset about it. Fuck the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And Shrew, Buck
and
Shrew.
Shrew. And fuck Shrew too. Yeah. So those are some of the biggest trades. And I think just looking at fantasy football strategy, like you really buck the trend of like what a typical dynasty roster construction is. Or at least that like if you listen to people talk about it, read it on Reddit or Twitter or like wherever people get their news sources. Like really the thing with dynasty is like people are always like, yeah, get the quarterbacks and receivers and then get running backs last and acquire those key pieces. Part of the reason why I wanted to set up the league the way that it is with the five flexes is to see what different strategies people might use. You started six running backs in that championship. The only receiver you started was T. Higgins, which again goes completely against the grain of like what's conventional in Dynasty. Uh, yeah, you want? I know that you want to talk through that at all. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I do. I've been wanting to go all running back for a long time. There was a point in the Bijan draft where I almost drafted AR, Bijan, and Gibbs, and I would have had Brees too already. I will kick myself for that for the rest of my life, but not now because I won a title. Um, at a certain point in the season, I decided to stop valuing age so much and just shoot for what I thought would work best for me, and frankly, it did. So, uh, it's always good to be unconventional, in my opinion. I've said it before, but any dynasty team's most important asset is the owner, and just being able to zig when everyone's zagging, hold to your guns, do what works for you. It worked in this case. And running backs are so boomer bust. I know they're volatile, but it worked for me because I like to trade, and they were more affordable than wide receivers were this year.
hmm Yeah, I definitely agree with the zigging while everyone else is zagging. Like, if everyone's overvaluing receivers, or even if it's correctly valuing receivers, but if the running backs are easier to acquire, like cheaper for the points, go after them. Like, I think that's always a good strategy. Is like, I've always believed that the player on a team, like whoever's the owner of a player, is the one who values him the most. Like, I've like long believed that because otherwise they'd be on someone else's team. And so. If you find someone who you think is being undervalued by their current owner, then it's a great player to trade for. Yeah, that's a like strategy that I've always like tried to maintain. And like whenever I'm like trying to trade with someone, it's like, okay, this person probably values them more than everyone else. Just because again, they roster them and you have your own biases.
And an important part of this for me was seeing Stunn's team build going all quite the opposite. All receivers, one running back with an okay backup running back. It's kind of a mirror. I don't think he did it wrong either. It just same idea, different position.
hmm Yeah, Stun really went wide receiver heavy, and again, like pretty much at least two of Stun's receivers had a spike week almost every single week, where like they would two of them would go off for 20, and then like having Saquon being RB1, like giving you a pretty safe floor at the running back position every week, and even a really even higher ceiling. Again, there's no one right or wrong way to build a team, and I think that's like my favorite part about again the size of our starting lineups, the having it just be flex instead of being pigeonholed to starting running backs and receivers really gives all of us a lot of like creative agency to build our rosters how we want. Maybe that's something I'll do in a future episode is just like look how everyone's constructed in terms of number of quarterbacks, some of them which starting or some of them just pure backups, number of running backs, receivers, tight ends. Like if you were to look across the league, there's everyone has a different strategy. Like some people only have three quarterbacks rostered. I have about 10. Some teams only have one or two running backs. I have about 15. Some teams have 15 receivers. Some teams have four. I don't know if any team has as low as four receivers, but yeah, there's just so many different ways you can build. And that's some of my favorite things. And then again, deciding when to push your chips in and like when you want to make your deals. Like Ryan sat on his draft capital because he truly didn't believe that this year was a playoff or a contention year for him. And so he decided he'd rather just hold his chips in and then go in for it next season instead of trying to go in on this season. Both you and Stun were pretty aggressive in trading away draft picks throughout the season and the offseason this past year. Because again, both of you were the bottom two in the league the first 2 years, and you're both sick and tired of it and want to change your luck. Really, there's no right or wrong way to winning a dynasty title. Like Chaz, the last 3 years has made the playoffs. He traded for Dalvin Cook right before the playoffs year one. Got bounced in the first round. Didn't make any moves last year. Won a title. Traded for Tyreek Hill before the playoffs this year. Got bounced in round one again. Like really, you never know what's going to happen with any of these trades, any of these players. Whether how much you want to push committing going in or out. Any given year is totally up to the owner. And yeah, that's what makes this fun to me is like it really honestly feels like playing Madden as a kid, where like we have a shared player pool, we're all trying to make our teams as best as possible. And yeah, I just like Dynasty. I could talk about it for hours, talk about the strategy and game theory behind it. But yeah, that's something I'm really excited to see going into this offseason is do any teams try and mimic your approach of going RB heavy? Do teams want to try and be a little more wide receiver heavy? Like I think both Mark and I have a pretty good balance between like running backs and receivers. We were both usually starting like three and four of each. So Ryan was also another team that was pretty wide receiver heavy. He was pretty much only ever starting Swift and maybe Kareem Hunt were like the only running backs he was ever starting. Everything else was receivers, and he ended up getting some wins out of that too. So
He takes good deals, and he had some good deals on the table for some running backs. So I don't know if he did it on purpose, but he definitely. I don't know if he can rely on Swift moving forward next year. I'll be interested to see what he does this offseason.
hmm yeah, I know like with Logan's pick, I think he was hoping it'd be top two, just so he could either like lock his hands on either top running back or top receiver. Being at three, it really comes. He doesn't really have as much control over it. I mean, perhaps he makes a trade up for Bijan. Maybe he makes a trade up for Genty. Maybe he trades that third overall pick for a player. Although if he I feel like he should have done that during the season if he was going to trade it for a player. But yeah, that'll be Ryan's a team to watch. Beans is another one I think is going to be pretty interesting to watch because he doesn't really have a second quarterback right now. He seems like has a pretty good foundation in place at running back. Beans probably could use another. I mean, I guess he doesn't even really need receivers. He just really needs more flexes that score points, whether that's running back or receiver. Um, Again, all it comes down to how you want to construct your roster. Sokol's another very interesting one because his team is pretty much all draft picks right now. Like he has four receivers on his team right now. I think he could pretty comfortably start next year in Amon-Ra, Olave, Shakir, and Rashad Bateman. It's kind of like a low end starter. And so, like with his three first, and I think he has like 2 or 3 seconds. What Sokol ends up doing is gonna be pretty interesting. Trevor's sitting on a shit ton of draft capital too. Again, whatever ends up doing this offseason is gonna be interesting. He's already been kind of running back heavy. Although his receivers have been pretty good of late. Like Neighbors had a pretty good playoff run. Xavier Worthy ended up having a pretty good playoff run. Ricky Pearsall last night kind of broke out against the Lions.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Trevor definitely has some receivers in place already too, even though his team looks more RB heavy at the moment. But yeah, I'm excited to see what these teams are doing in the offseason, which kind of leads us to the offseason predictions portion of the show. And I'm just curious if you have any like bold offseason predictions that you think are going to happen.
I think we're going to see a pretty big quarterback carousel. I think more than half the league could use a better second quarterback. And there's a few teams that have quite a, maybe not a bunch of quarterbacks, but can afford to move them. So my big prediction for the offseason is we'll see some quarterback movement. That will probably be bigger than we've seen in prior off seasons.
Yeah, okay, that's a good. I like that prediction. And like
And
that's
you
something.
could point to every team in the league to be a part of it too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I have no issues moving on from either Kyler or Dak if the right deal is being struck. Whether that's me upgrading, downgrading, I'm gonna be pretty open to different moves this offseason. If like at least for me myself personally, like JJ, not JJ, Justin Jefferson and Nico Collins are probably gonna stay on my roster. I don't really, again, the player who usually has, like how I said earlier, whoever has that player usually values him the highest. I probably value him the highest. But anyone else on my roster, I think would be fair game. Achan's probably another one that would be tough to buy off of me, but I could really see myself moving anyone. I mean, you've been shown to or known to sell anyone at any time for any price. So whether it's a big or a small deal, I could see you shaking some things up. Yeah, I like the prediction of the moving quarterbacks. I mean, really, since our league has started, if we were to look at the top 20 quarterbacks from this season, there's really not that many that have been traded. Like Jalen Hurts was traded year one before the season even started. Ryan traded away Goff last year. I traded away Baker in the offseason. And I think really other than those three, like quarterbacks that were taken in the startup have like mostly stayed on those teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm really like I'm trying to think of other examples. Like I Ryan and I were talking about this the other day, but there really aren't that many quarterbacks that have been moved a lot. But again, like you mentioned, Trevor's gonna need a QB2. If he's taking Genti at one, I don't think he's getting a quarterback two at 112. So Trevor's definitely a team. Probably not relying on a rookie. Might need to make a trade. Beans will need a QB two. Sokol's a little interesting because he has Bryce Young. Uh, does he
I
believe
hate
enough in
Bryce Young.
what?
I hate Bryce Young, but he's good.
He's been really good since he got benched and came back from his benching. Sokol might not think he needs one, and maybe he takes a running back or receiver at 102. If he even makes the pick at 102, Sokol's like made very few rookie picks. It's kind of hard to get a gauge on what he might do in this draft because we haven't really seen what he might do. He's been pretty wide receiver heavy before, but who knows if that approach changes or stays the same. Like again, I think something that's really important is like that we all evolve with new data, new ideas, like staying in lock take, staying with the same plan, whether it's working or not, might not always be the best thing. I know you personally were trying to build this young super team where they were all going to come up in age together, and that didn't particularly work, just with injuries and the maybe a pick or two busting.
It just wasn't for me, but it's working for Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
You could point to Stun and his original running back army. Didn't work for him, but it's working for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, a lot of it is any given year, you really don't know like who's going to break out, like who's going to come out of nowhere and have a great season. Like Sam Darnold being QB like seven in fantasy this year, I didn't see coming. I don't really think anyone could have. Um, J.K. Dobbins having as strong of a year as he had. I mean, it was possible, but I didn't see it as very likely, just like given how bad his injuries were before.
Mhm.
Or like 2 years ago, Kyron Williams came out of completely nowhere and ended up being a top five running back for a couple of years now. You just never know. Never know what random players are going to pop off and like completely change a team's outlook. Like Beans with Chase Brown this past year. Like Chase Brown was being drafted a little bit in redraft, or not a little bit. He was definitely was being drafted in redraft, but not nowhere like crazy. It was still like 12th to like 14th round kind of player. Put together a fantastic season. Um,
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm excited to see what people are going to do in the offseason. I wonder, I mean, it's too early to say. You made like 30 trades last offseason. I made about 10 myself. Be interesting to see if the trade activity goes up or goes down. I mean, really, like I said, a lot of the trade market navigated through us the last couple of years in the offseason. So it'll be interesting to see if either of us really change that approach of like being aggressive on the trade market or if either of us start to hold a little bit more given our successes. Um,
I'm really interested to see what Logan does.
Yeah, Logan, I think Logan right now, if he really wanted to, could have an epic tank job for next year. And it really wouldn't even require that much work.
Yep.
It'd probably be trading away Josh Jacobs and James Conner and Amari Cooper if he can still get anything for him, or maybe Tyler Lockett if he can still get anything for him. Yeah, if Logan trades away like Jacobs and James Conner, I think he could, and he doesn't have any draft picks either. So like he's really not adding to this roster. He trades away those two and just is fine with the tank job of 2025. I think he could be looking really strong in 2026 and beyond. Yeah, Logan's definitely a team to monitor. And again, a lot of that's just from like what is he going to do, considering he really doesn't have a lot to work with in terms of draft capital this year. Seems to have he is your first in 26 and 27 though. So again, I think he could have an epic tank job. He could probably should get at least one first for Jacobs if he decides to move on from Jacobs. Yeah, Logan's an interesting one. I'm like trying to think of like who else like what does Jake do? I think Kelsey really is going to retire this offseason, and that's going to be a pretty big hole on Jake's team. Kamara got injured down the stretch, and maybe Kendrick
Cup.
Miller steps into a bigger role. Cooper Kupp's another year older. Like Jake's another team. He doesn't have a quarterback two anymore. When you mentioned teams needing a quarterback in
Yeah.
the trade market, forgot to include Jake. Jake is very much in that conversation as well. Yeah, it seems like a lot of the now that we're talking about it, a lot of the quarterbacks are really consolidated on a couple teams. And a lot of those teams probably could use better flex options or like a tier up or tier down. So, no, that'll be interesting.
Mhm.
All right, we have about 4 minutes left. I really don't have much else I want to say, but I wonder if you had any other topics you want to explore, any other talking points you want to bring up.
I wanted to do a small bit of self promotion going into the off season. Joe Mixon will be available for trade, and one of my quarterbacks will be available for trade. I am not in a rush to make any move, but if you guys start reaching out, I'd like to start negotiating.
Okay. While you're doing some self promotion, I'm going to do some self promotion too. Like I said, I mentioned earlier, really, I'm open to trading kind of anyone on my team. I mean, I don't see myself trading away Jefferson or Nico, but I would trade Kyler. I would trade Brees. I probably won't trade Achan, but I'd listen. I could consider trading Dak. There's really nothing off the table that I wouldn't consider doing. So really, I just kind of want to whatever offers are out there and available, just kind of want to see what maybe I could do. Uh, I don't really want to just like say like, oh, this is exactly who I want for what price because you really don't know what's going to come in when you like put some of the bigger names out there. Yeah, I always want to be open-minded. Like I really try never have
Mhm.
anyone be truly off limits, just because if someone's willing to give you the Godfather offer, sometimes you just have to take it.
Rich get richer.
Yep, rich get richer.
I did think of one thing. I wanted to say I'm going to be using my winnings to buy a title for the league. I'm going to have a custom made title belt for the winner to hand off to the winner each year. And to me, that just made the most sense because this is called the Gallery Dojo League. And I know the belt was a really big deal going through college. So that just seems like the most appropriate way to do it. If anyone has any reason to go against that, I'd really be open to hearing the argument for a trophy instead.
No, Levi, I'm 100% in support of having the belt being the like trophy for this league. That's actually something Logan had
Cool.
talked about doing when he won the league was but like getting a like proper trophy, whether it's a frisbee or like a belt. Just never came anything of it. Nothing came of it. I kind of just put it on the back burner because it wasn't anything of a priority for me. But yeah, I love the idea of a championship belt. And again, it does have some meaning for a lot of us. And even like Sokol was into wrestling as a kid too. And I know like the belt's like a pretty big thing in wrestling too. So
It's
I
the
put,
crown jewel, man.
Yeah, it's something that would have meaning to all of us. I love it as the idea for a championship trophy. Yeah.
Cool.
All
Fuck
right.
yeah.
Yeah. And with that, we are at time. Thank you everyone for listening to the GDFL podcast. I'll probably sporadically maybe do some episodes this off season. I might do one after the NFL draft just to talk about like what I like for fits, maybe. Maybe not though. I don't know if I want to reveal my hand too much. Probably we'll do one before next season starts, like sometime after our rookie draft in August. But thank you all for listening all season. It's truly been a pleasure. I've had fun. Thank you for everyone who's joined me all season, helping me document Levi's championship season. Thank you, Levi, for being a common guest of the show. And yeah, any final words?
Thanks for having me. Go Cows.
Go Cows. And with that, I will end the show. See you all next season.